The day my husband died in a crash, his cousin whispered a marriage proposal beside his coffin. That night, I found Ethan's hidden journal and a sealed letter from his lawyer. My hands trembled as I read the truth. I vanished by morning. What I did next? He never recovered. The last thing I remember from that day was the soft hum of the air conditioner and the way the late afternoon sun spilled through the kitchen window, warming Ethan's favorite chair. He had just texted me a picture of a silly road sign he'd passed on the highway, something about Armadillo's Crossing. I smiled. That was Ethan, always finding something small to laugh about. He said he'd be home in an hour, that he'd pick up my favorite peach cobbler from the bakery near the office. And then he never came home. They said the other driver had been on his phone. Didn't even see the red light. Ethan's car was struck on the driver's side. The doctors told me he died instantly. That was supposed to be comforting. I don't remember much of what came next, only that everything felt distant, like I was watching my own life from behind a foggy window. People came and went. Neighbors brought casseroles. Miles flew in from Austin and stayed in the guest room. And then there was Victor. Victor Hale, Ethan's cousin, showed up the night of the accident. I wasn't surprised. He and Ethan had been close in a distant kind of way. Victor lived in Atlanta, sold commercial properties, drove a sleek black car, and always seemed just a little too eager at family functions. He was unmarried, older than Ethan by a few years, and had a way of commanding attention when he walked into a room. But I never thought much about him. He was just Victor. At first, he seemed helpful. He handled some of the calls I couldn't face. He spoke with the funeral home, coordinated with the firm Ethan had co-owned. I was grateful. I thought he was being kind. But then came the funeral. It was a warm Sunday morning. People filled the church, dressed in quiet colors, whispering condolences. I sat in the front pew, numb, clutching the tissue I hadn't used because I was beyond crying. The service was simple, just like Ethan would have wanted. As the last hymn ended, and people began moving toward the reception hall next door, Victor approached me. His suit was perfectly pressed, his cologne sharp. He knelt beside my seat, too close, and reached for my hand. "Clara," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "I know this is a terrible time, but I need to say something important." I blinked at him. I thought he was going to say something about Ethan. Instead, he pulled out a small black box. I stared at it, confused, as he opened it to reveal a diamond ring. Smaller than mine. Older. Used. "I know you're hurting," he continued, and I realized people were beginning to notice, to look our way. "But Ethan would have wanted you to be taken care of. I can be that for you. You shouldn't have to face this alone." My heart pounded in my ears. My throat closed. I couldn't speak. I pulled my hand away slowly and stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't slap him. I just walked out. I left everyone behind and stood alone by Ethan's grave, staring at the still fresh soil. That was the first moment I felt truly alone. Later that night, Miles asked me if something had happened between me and Victor. I lied. I said I was tired. I didn't want to explain what I couldn't yet process. I thought maybe Victor had spoken out of grief, confusion. But deep down I knew better. The days that followed only made things worse. Victor began showing up at the house uninvited, bringing documents, making calls on my behalf. He told Miles I was too overwhelmed to handle the legal details. He offered to take over managing the finances, said he'd already spoken with the firm's partners. Said I wouldn't have to worry about anything. What started as subtle help turned into full control. I noticed bills being paid without my knowledge, mail being redirected. When I tried to log into our shared bank account, the password had been changed. I confronted Victor once, asked him to back off. He smiled, that slick salesman smile, and said, "Clara, I'm just trying to help. You're not in the right frame of mind. Everyone can see that." He said it with such certainty that I started to wonder if it was true. Even Miles began to shift. He started asking Victor for advice, deferring to his opinions. He said I was exhausted, not thinking clearly, and maybe I needed a break. "You've been through so much, Mom," he told me one evening. "Uncle Victor just wants to ease the burden." Uncle Victor. The man had slid so easily into our lives, into my son's trust. And I had let him. The house felt heavier each day. Ethan's favorite books sat untouched. The architectural sketches he had once drawn late into the night still hung above his desk. Victor wanted me to sell the house, said it was too much for me to handle alone. "You should stay with your sister in Charleston for a while," he suggested. "Let me take care of the estate." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, wrapped in Ethan's old sweater, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. My chest ached, not just from grief, but from a growing sense of dread. I didn't know what Victor was planning, but I knew I had to get away to think clearly. So the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I packed a small bag. I left no note, no calls, no goodbyes. I took the envelope of emergency cash Ethan had hidden in the back of our closet, just under $2,000, and drove. I didn't know where I was going until I saw the sign for Asheville. Ethan and I had once spent a weekend there when we were newly married. We said we'd come back when we were older, when life was slower. Now I was going alone. I found a small cabin just outside town. The place was quiet, tucked into the trees, with nothing but the rustling of leaves and distant chirping to break the silence. It was what I needed. For the first time in weeks, I was alone with my thoughts. And that's when I found it, tucked inside the lining of Ethan's leather satchel. The one he used for site visits and project notes was a brown notebook. I almost missed it, but when I opened the cover and saw his handwriting, I froze. There, written in black ink, was a date, 3 weeks before his death. My hands trembled as I flipped the page. And what I read next changed everything. The first line on that page read, "If something happens to me, this isn't an accident." I sat frozen in that quiet cabin, my fingers still pressed to Ethan's words. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp by the window. I could hear the wind brushing through the trees outside, but in that moment, everything felt unnaturally still. Ethan had known. In entry after entry, he wrote about the things I hadn't noticed, or maybe refused to see. He talked about Victor, about how he'd been asking strange questions. About the day Victor stopped by his office unannounced, asking about their joint holdings, asking about insurance policies, the firm, even the house. Ethan had brushed it off as curiosity at first, but Victor kept pushing. He mentioned a particular conversation, one I had never known about, where Victor, laughing over dinner, asked Ethan what would happen to all this if Ethan ever passed unexpectedly. At the time, Ethan had laughed along. But he wrote that something about Victor's tone had unsettled him. Another page described a night when Ethan caught Victor snooping through his home office during a family gathering. Victor claimed he was looking for the bathroom. My hands trembled as I read through every word. I could feel Ethan's unease building page by page, his writing growing more urgent. And then came the letter. It was folded neatly at the back of the notebook, addressed to me in Ethan's sharp, familiar handwriting. "Clara," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I'm sorry I couldn't tell you these things in person, but I didn't want to worry you. I've been making some changes to protect you, just in case." He went on to explain everything. 3 weeks before the accident, Ethan had updated his will and transferred all of our major assets, including the house, the firm shares, and our joint savings, into a legal trust under my name. He'd excluded Victor entirely. He wrote that he'd met with a lawyer named Judith Klein in Savannah. She had the full paperwork, and Ethan had left instructions for her to release it to me if anything happened. "Don't let Victor make you doubt yourself," Ethan wrote. "You are stronger than you know. And you don't need anyone managing your life for you. Not now. Not ever." I cried like I hadn't cried since the night Ethan died. Not because I was grieving this time, but because someone had believed in me, had protected me, even when I hadn't seen the danger. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the table, reading and rereading Ethan's words until the sun rose. I made coffee and opened my laptop. Slowly, I began searching for Judith Klein. She was still practicing, just as Ethan said. I called her office. When I gave my name, the receptionist's tone changed immediately. "One moment, please," she said. Judith's voice was calm and measured when she came on the line. "Clara, I've been expecting your call," she said. We scheduled a meeting. I drove back to Savannah 2 days later, more nervous than I had been in years. I parked 3 blocks from Judith's office so Victor wouldn't recognize my car, just in case. When I walked in, Judith greeted me with a warmth that didn't feel rehearsed. She led me into her office, closed the door, and handed me a thick folder. Inside were copies of every legal document Ethan had updated. The trust, the property deeds, and a signed declaration barring Victor from having any control over our assets. My name was on everything. "There's more," Judith said gently. She slid over another file. "After your husband's death, Victor contacted our office. He claimed you were mentally unfit and requested emergency authority to access your estate." I felt my stomach drop. "He tried to have me declared incompetent." I asked. She nodded. "We denied the request immediately. Your husband's paperwork was airtight. But he was persistent. Victor had even sent emails accusing me of paranoia, saying I was refusing help and emotionally unstable. He'd tried to convince people that I wasn't capable of handling life without Ethan. Judith looked at me carefully. He's been trying to erase your credibility from the moment your husband passed. I felt a fire spark in my chest. Not rage. Not yet. Just something quiet. Steady. Over the next few days, I moved into a small apartment under a different name. It was nothing special, a one-bedroom above a bookstore, but it was mine. I bought a burner phone, created new passwords, and moved the trust funds into a secure private account. I hired a forensic accountant to track any financial movement Victor had made since Ethan's death. I didn't tell Miles I was back. I needed to be ready first. During that time, I started writing things down. Every conversation, every moment, every manipulation I could remember. Victor's comments. The funeral proposal. The way Miles had started doubting me. I built a paper trail, not for revenge, but for truth. For proof. And the more I dug, the more I found. Victor had tried to redirect the deed to our Savannah house into a shared name. He had tried to list himself as managing partner at Ethan's firm. And worst of all, he'd submitted a fake letter to Ethan's life insurance provider, attempting to claim a portion of the payout. I kept quiet. I didn't storm in and confront him. I didn't scream or shout. I waited. Because I knew what he didn't. This time I had the upper hand. And when I returned, I would make sure he knew exactly who he had underestimated. 2 months after I disappeared, I walked back into my house as if I had never left. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The air was warm, the sky overcast, and the old wooden porch creaked under my shoes like it was surprised to feel my footsteps again. I still had Ethan's keys. Victor hadn't changed the locks. Of course he hadn't. He didn't expect me to return. He thought I was broken, done, erased. I stepped into the living room, the same one where we used to host Sunday dinners, where Ethan would fall asleep with a book on his chest and the dog at his feet. Victor was sitting at the desk, my desk, on the phone. I saw his back stiffen when the door clicked shut behind me. He turned slowly, confused, then shocked. His eyes widened, and for a second I could see him calculating. His mouth opened, and he stood quickly. "Clara," he said, like he wasn't sure I was real. "Where? What happened? We've all been worried." I held up one hand to stop him. "I didn't come to talk. I came to end this." "Save it," I said calmly, stepping further inside. I carried a folder under my arm. "I know what you've been doing. I have every email, every false document, every attempt you made to take what was never yours." His expression changed, shifted from fake concern to barely concealed panic. He opened his mouth again, but I shook my head. "I don't need your excuses, Victor. I have legal records. I have the trust. I have the attorney's notes. And most importantly, I have every bit of evidence that you tried to declare me mentally unfit." His lips pressed into a thin line. The silence in the room grew thick, uncomfortable. And for the first time, I saw him as he really was, not slick, not smooth. Just small. A man who had lost control and didn't know how to get it back. "You used my grief," I continued, voice still steady, "as a weapon. You humiliated me. You lied to my son. You tried to rewrite who I was. But the thing you forgot is, I remember. And I kept receipts." I walked past him, laid the folder on the coffee table. I didn't have to open it. He knew what was inside. He'd been living in my house, wearing the illusion of control, while I built a case against him piece by piece. "Leave," I said. He hesitated, tried to smirk. "Clara, let's be reasonable. I've been handling everything while you've been trespassing," I said more firmly now. "And you're finished." He paused just for a breath. Then without another word, he grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and walked out the door. I waited until I heard his car pull away before I exhaled. The house was still. Not empty. Just still. The next day I called Miles. When he answered, I could hear the hesitance in his voice. "Mom, is that really you?" "It's me," I said. "And I need you to come by. Alone." He came that evening. I made tea the way I used to. We sat in the kitchen, facing each other. I slid a printed report across the table. It was from the forensic audit I'd had done. It outlined everything. Every account Victor tried to access, every form he filed, the lies he told, the money he tried to shift. All of it. Miles read it slowly, quietly. I didn't interrupt. When he was done, he leaned back in his chair, stunned. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know. I thought he was helping. You were just gone. I left because I couldn't fight him and grieve at the same time," I said softly. "And because even you started to believe him." Miles looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean to. He said you weren't coping. That you needed time." that I should let him handle things. He knew what he was doing. He's done it before, probably. But this time he picked the wrong woman. I'm sorry, he said, eyes wet. I should have asked you. I should have trusted you. I don't need you to be sorry, I said. I need you to see me, not as someone fragile, not as someone who needs rescuing. I need you to see that I'm still your mother. Still standing. He nodded slowly. I do, he said. Now I do. Later that week, I met with Judith again. We finalized everything, property titles, firm ownership, and a legal cease and desist against Victor. If he tried to come near the house or the finances again, he'd face charges. I didn't go around telling everyone what happened. I didn't want the drama. But I did forward the audit report to a few of Ethan's former partners, and I let word spread in its own quiet way. Victor stopped calling, stopped showing up. He vanished from our lives just as suddenly as he had inserted himself into them. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt like mine again. I walked through each room, touching Ethan's books, dusting off the old record player he loved. I played his favorite jazz tune and stood alone in the living room, swaying softly, remembering what it felt like to breathe without fear, without judgment, without lies. I wasn't the same woman I was before Ethan died, but I was still here, and I was just getting started. Weeks passed, and life began to take on a different rhythm. Not the life I had with Ethan, but something new, quieter, steadier. I started going on morning walks again, like we used to do together. I planted new flowers in the garden beds, right next to the roses Ethan had cared for so lovingly. I didn't trim them. He always liked them a little wild. One evening, I sat outside with a glass of wine and opened my notebook, the one I'd started in Asheville. I'd filled it with thoughts, questions, memories, and sometimes just single words that described how I felt on the hardest days. But now I wrote something different. I wrote I came back. And for the first time, it didn't feel like I was coming back to a place. It felt like I was coming back to myself. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Judith. She sounded calm but serious. We completed the final audit, she said. There's something you should see. I drove to her office the next morning, my heart steady. No fear. No hesitation. Just readiness. She handed me a file. Inside were copies of bank transfers, emails, and call logs. Victor hadn't just tried to manipulate things after Ethan died. He had started months before the accident. There were records showing he contacted another attorney, posing as Ethan's proxy. He'd tried to move a portion of our savings, over $60,000, into a new investment under his name. The bank flagged it and stopped the transaction. But he had been trying. There was even a flagged insurance inquiry. He had contacted Ethan's life insurance provider 2 weeks before the crash, asking for details on beneficiary changes. I sat there, absorbing it all, the final pieces of a puzzle that had haunted me since the day Victor knelt beside me at Ethan's funeral. Ethan had sensed it. That's why he'd taken those steps. And now I understood just how close we came to losing everything, to being completely wiped out by someone who smiled in our faces and sharpened his knives in private. I'm not pressing charges, I told Judith quietly. Not yet, but I want everything locked down. Permanently. Already done, she replied. I left with the file and mailed a copy to Miles. I didn't include a note. I didn't need to. The truth spoke clearly on its own. The next week, Miles came by with a box of photos. He'd found them going through Ethan's old office. I thought you might want these, he said, setting them on the table. We sat down and started flipping through them. Ethan at his first design firm, sketches of buildings he'd dreamed of, photos of the three of us on family trips. For the first time in months, we laughed. Later, Miles said something that stuck with me. You didn't just come back, Mom, he said. You came back different. Stronger. No, I said, smiling faintly. I was always this strong. I just forgot for a while. The sun dipped low over the garden that evening. The wind chimes Ethan had hung above the porch began to sing softly. I stood among the flowers, the ones I'd planted for myself, and closed my eyes. I wasn't the woman Victor had tried to erase. I wasn't the fragile widow people thought needed saving. I was Clara Westwood, a wife, a mother, and now, fully my own person. And I would never be invisible again.